Everybody. So today I'm going to talk about Bazus again. I'm going to quickly reclarify on this, on who this character is. Um, Bazus is a king of Adiabene, and the approximate date of his death is in AD 31 during the reign of Pontius Pilate. He did not die by crucifixion, by the way. That's a very important point, and I'll get to that in just a moment. He was not Rome's enemy. In fact, his ancestors were a bit pro-Roman, and it just so happens that one of his well-known ancestors is Ptolemy I Soter. And what's interesting about Ptolemy I Soter is that he founded Serapism in the 4th century BC and was basically solidified by the time he became pharaoh of Egypt in 305 BC. That's important because if we go to Emperor Hadrian's letter real quick, his biography, you can find this in the Augustan history, also known as Historia Augusta. And in there's a letter in his biography to Pope Servanius. And what this letter had to say is that he finds that the worshippers of Serapis call themselves Christians. Now, this is very bad for Christianity, because this emperor lived like in the, when did he live? I don't remember. I know he lived in the late 1st century AD, early 2nd century AD. Okay, yeah, he was born in 76 AD and died in 138 AD. Now that's bad for Christianity anyway, because this biography pretty much is telling people that the worshippers of Serapis are calling themselves bishops of Christ or Christians, whatever. But this religion of Serapism is 300 years older than Christianity is supposed to be. That means that technically, more than technically, really, Christianity existed 300 years before Jesus, showing he didn't found Christianity. Jesus was not even always a relevant figure in Christianity until it was reformed by Josephus when he wrote the Antiquities of the Jews in 94 AD. So basically, Josephus reorganized Serapism into Flavian Christianity. That's exactly what he did. And if you go to look in his Against Apion, book 1, verses 50 to 51, he's admitting that he's writing all his books at the appeal of Emperor Vespasian and Titus. That being said, let's go back to Bazus for a moment and talk about him. Bazus dies in the same time period that this Jesus that Josephus wrote about was crucified in as well. But at that point, you couldn't help to wonder but think, why does Bazus die in 31 AD, but he's not crucified? And people that were recording this family history at his time period, contemporary writers, never said he was crucified, nor was even Rome's enemy for that matter. It sounds like what Josephus did, because in Antiquities book 18, chapter 3, verse 3, that's where Josephus talks about his, that's famous Jesus quotation. In the Greek, it reads Isus, by the way, for those that don't know Jesus' Greek name. It's also the same way in the Greek New Testament. So basically, Josephus decided to pronounce Bazus' name a little differently as Isus. But in any given case, the evidence is very clear. Josephus used Baal-Zeus as a chronological catalyst to create the narrative of Jesus. And since the crucifixion was a common thing in Rome, man, that just goes real well with synchronizing it with first century historical context. But in the end, he also did something else. He replaced Serapis with Jesus. That's what he did. He kept the miracle stories of Serapis preserved, because Serapis is a dying, rising god. Not surprising that this passes down to Isus as well, because he also dies and rises again. Now, that being said, we know Baal-Zeus is a descendant of the Ptolemaic bloodline, because in one of the Jewish histories called the Bereshith Rabbah, Baal-Zeus and his brother Zawatas, Monobazus and his brother Zawatas are children of Ptolemy, also pronounced Ptolemy. Historically, that's referring to Ptolemy Bar Menneus. He died in 40 BC because of a Parthian invasion of Judea. And Menneus actually became Monobazus. And that was the basis for the name. So they relocated from the kingdom of Chalcis to the land of Adiabene. Very obviously, they get out of danger. Similar to what happened with the story of Jesus, in which Mary took baby Jesus, and Joseph went along with them out of Judea to get away from Herod and the massacre of the innocents. It's a very similar story. It's pretty much the same story. Granted, there is some influx with the story of Mariamne I and her alleged adultery with someone called Joseph, which also parallels the story of the massacre of the innocents very nicely. If you look into that, Herod has like 2 of her children killed. It's a very similar story as well. Now, that being said, Baal-Zeus is a son of Izates the First, which is the very same Zawatas, the brother of Monobazus, this son of Ptolemy, Bar Menneus. We know this because you go to Josephus, and he's very clear that he says Helena is the sister and wife of Monobazus, whom is named Baal-Zeus. So they are the children of Izates the First, also known as Zawatas, and Zawatas has a brother called Monobazus. Not to be confused with Monobaz the First and Monobaz the Second, all completely different people. So I just want to clarify that. And even if you were to look at it, because it doesn't really matter which way you look at it. That Baal-Zeus is historical Jesus, or he is the chronological catalyst, is very different from the Jesus in the Bible. But not entirely too different either. Because the Jesus in the Bible is very pro-Roman. Yes, there are parts of Jesus where he appears to be against Rome. It's very obvious they left some messianic elements. Obviously scribbles from the works of Josephus that were not redacted from the New Testament. Where he was talking about Jewish war leaders that were referred to as Isus. Because not all the people referred to as Isus were pro-Romans. But Baal-Zeus, in terms of his the lifestyle of his ancestors, yeah. Now Baal-Zeus was not necessarily pro-Roman directly. However, he wasn't against Rome either, so he had neutral ground. When we think about it, that's totally acceptable for the Flavians, especially given his pro-Roman ancestry. Because they're not about to allow Josephus to deify a messianic war leader now, would they? Why would you make the enemy of Rome the son of God? That makes absolutely no sense. And Josephus would have known that, given that Vespasian and his son Titus are literally reviewing the writings of his works. So he's not about to piss them off, and even if they do get pissed off, he'll just write something else to their accommodations. The only person they would allow him to use as a historical catalyst would be Bazus, because it's very obvious that he was using first century history to help create this new character. Because they're not, like I said, they're not about to deify the enemy of Rome and make him into the son of God. That's silly. Now, granted, he might have to use some messianic elements to help formulate his story, because he has to base his character on history. If he's going to make people think this Jesus that did miracles and is telling everybody to bow down to Rome existed, he has to use people's histories within the first century, their lifestyle, in order to make it appear that this guy existed. Oh, so yeah, this, Bazus, Jesus in this case, he existed during the reign of Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate existed, right? So why am I going to doubt he died and rose again, walked on water, raised somebody from the dead, descended to the underworld, descended to heaven? They're not going to doubt it, because back then people didn't think the way they do now. Okay, that wasn't always the case though, but in the case of people in the first century, they got fooled, especially onwards after that. Because they didn't realize that Bazus was renamed to Jesus by Josephus and was given the entire story of Serapis, whom was basically a god that was synchronized with a whole lot of Greco-Egyptian deities back in the day by the Ptolemies. And the thing is, if you look up Serapis, he won't have the attributes that I'm talking about in this video unless you realize he was synchronized with a bunch of different gods, which is something you can research and confirm yourself. Serapis was involved in several trinities. He was synchronized with Hades, Dionysus. Dionysus was up on par with Orion. Orion walked on water. Dionysus was put on trial by King Pentheus, which Pentheus sounds suspiciously like Pontius. I suspect Pontius was actually named after Pentheus. In any case, Josephus certainly renamed him to Pontius to suit first century historicity context. He was trying to place this guy into first century context. So, that being said, let's just sum it all up. What did Josephus do? He historicized a celestial deity called Serapis, renamed him to Jesus, which is pronouncing the name of Bazus differently, and gave Bazus a historical figure, the story of the synchronized deity of Serapis, in order to historicize a dying rising god whom had no historicity in the first century to begin with. And that is pretty much how this character was created. It's not hard to see it. It's not hard to see it at all. You can research this yourself. I mentioned the sources. Go look them up. Granted, I didn't get everything talked about in one video. I'm still finishing up my book. Once my book is out, I'll make a whole video about that. It's going to come out this year. I can confirm that right now. I just don't have the exact release date. It's just once it's uploaded up there, it's not going to take long for it to get published either. So it's going online first. Then it'll be hard copy. Hard copy's coming out later. I'm talking about the origins of all three religions in one book. It's getting everything out there in one book. So yeah, that's the plan. I will see all of you later.